Authors, editors, publishers, book cover designers, agents, critics, readers. A whole lot of professionals come together for a book. I am your host, Koral Dasgupta, all set to ask some interesting, straightforward, and fun questions to our guests. It's great pleasure for me to have author historian William Dalrymple as our guest. Welcome to the show, William.
How are you?
So, William, I'll get on to the questions. And just to tell you before that we are extremely excited to have you on our show. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So, William, I will start with a very fundamental question. You were looked up as a very serious intellectual, and general readers often find your work to be intellectually intimidating. Do you think history as a subject or historians as interpreters bear this image, or they should?
Well, first of all, I quibble that people find my work intimidating. I think that at the moment, I believe I am the best-selling historian in the country. Exactly. And the reason for that is that it is accessible, that history need not be inaccessible. And I make great efforts to make sure that though I put in years and years of research with each book, the style it's written in is not in forbidding academic prose, but that the same conclusions and the same thoughts that have gone into the research are elucidated in simple, clear, literary prose that's understandable. You have once you've done your research, you have the option as a historian to write it up in clear, lucid prose, or as some historians feel the need to do, to write it in dense academic sort of post-colonial jargon. And that I can understand where that's coming from. And there are certain parts of the academic community who feel that language is helpful. But I think with human affairs, as opposed to high science, there are very few things that cannot be conveyed in simple, clear, short sentences, accessible English. And I try to use the same. I spend as much time on my prose as any novelist would, and I think that's part of the job. I don't, particularly as I'm not working in a sense, within academia with a view to being, struggling to get the next lectureship or whatever it is. I'm not compelled to write in jargon and can present my conclusions clearly and in what I as fine a prose as I can muster. I don't think there's any need. I mean, I think if you're dealing with high science, obviously there's a need for equations and specialist language. But history is about human beings. It's about human affairs. And in the same way that we can describe what happened to us on the way to the shops in the morning. We can describe what happened to someone on the way to the shops in 1800 or 1100 or 200 BC.
True. Your answer prompts me to ask you something, which is, again, very, very basic, that, William, you are not affiliated in terms of a job with any institute or with any institute or with any body, for that matter. You are not in a job situation. How do you keep the targets? How do you kind of stay motivated that this is a subject that you will take up, this is something that you will research, and this is something that you will write?
Oh, primarily, because I have to say, in order to make a living, I finish a book, and I certainly would, hope that I take a few months off to launch the book and maybe a couple of weeks holiday. But at the end of that, I have to go back and think hard about what my next project will be, which is the state I'm in at the moment, incidentally. In order to keep the wolf from the door, I have to make a living. My great hero and my sort of guru as a writer of history is an extraordinary medievalist, now dead, called Sir Stephen Runciman. Little known in India, but very celebrated in Great Britain. And Runciman was the great historian from the kind of 50s through to the 90s. He was the great historian of Byzantium and the Crusades and the history of sort of East-West relations in the Middle East.
Mm.
And I loved his books. They were incredibly well researched, but they were written in prose that, you wanted to read. That, they were as enjoyable to read as a good novel, but they were not fiction. They were non-fiction. And I went to see him before he died. He was already a very good man. And he told me about how he'd chosen at a certain point in his life to leave Trinity College, Cambridge, which was my college too. And leave the teaching machine and the academic machine in order to write, because he wanted to write. He knew that his gift, he did have an exceptional gift as a writer. And he didn't want to spend his life, getting involved in, running the university or becoming vice chancellor or head of the Senate or, any other options which would have been open to him, or even head of history.
Right.
Wanted to leave a memorial in terms of a shelf full of really good books. And he said to me that, and then he said, you don't feel you have to do a PhD and go into the academic machine. If you want to write, write. And if you have the gift, and you're lucky, you should be able to make a living. And I found, as long as I really work hard and produce a book every, ideally 3 or 4 years. Runciman said that, if you have the wish to write, you probably, you should give it a go. You don't feel you have to go into academia and mark papers and take tutorials. If what you actually want to do at the end of the day is to write books. And I've always took him at that advice. I spend, as long as someone would normally spend on a PhD for each book. I do, 4 years is my normal. My latest, The Anarchy, took 6, exceptionally. But each one of those is a 6-year project, and I find that if you can keep turning them over, find also, very importantly, finding a subject which is of interest not just to people in India but also in the US and Britain, Australia, internationally. Each one of these, you can sell the rights in a variety of different countries, and if you're lucky, you will be able to make a living. And I find I can. I mean, I haven't got much slack. Sense that once I finish one book, I pretty well have to go straight on to the next, and it helps if every 3 or 4 years you can find some way of doing something, a short book that's a bestseller, like I did Koh-i-Noor, which took actually 6 months.
Absolutely.
A short popular book as opposed to these great heavy ones. I do make a living. I'm not a rich man, but I certainly make as much as my contemporaries, who are in journalism or any of the media jobs. But I have to keep working to do that.
Yeah, and you inspire us a lot. We keep learning from you. So, William, you have scripted an inspiring success story with your life, a space where many of us would love to reach. So, given your influence and given your experience, what do you believe is your role in impacting younger generations?
Well, I mean, none of us, I don't think people go about living their life, quotes, in order to impact the younger generation. I mean, you live your life in order to make a living and do something that amuses you and that, fulfills you. I really like writing books. I find it very hard work. I find it difficult, but the sense of achievement at the end of writing a good book that gets good reviews and is widely read is it's a very satisfying life. I think I'm lucky in that there are quite a lot of people in Britain and America like me who do write outside academia and who win awards and write books that are very well reviewed, but are not part of the academic machine. Very few historians in this country do that, though. Ram Guha is the other obvious example of someone who does not teach, but does turn out a big serious history book that gets well reviewed every 3-4 years. I mean, I suppose I am a bit of an outlier in that sense in this country, and that not many other people have woken up to the fact that you can do that. But I think there is now a generation coming up that have seen that this life is possible. I'm thinking of Manu Pillai or Ira Mukoti, Parvati Sharma, generation below me. And they are now, making a very successful stab at the same sort of projects.
So, did you ever receive a comment or criticism or a review from someone with whom you may have some ideas or personality mismatch, but then the review had touched your heart or it made you think very deeply? And asking about your readers.
Yeah, no. When I think of reviewers, I mean, obviously it's reviews that you come across, in which in a sense are what you're thinking about as a when you're reading.
Indian review and Western review is very different. In the West, there are book critics. In India, we don't have book critics, not many of them.
Well, there's some very good ones. I think I can think of a few extremely good critics out there. I mean, probably at the front of the pack, Pankaj Mishra.
Yeah.
But there are many others, and I think again that's growing. I think we're finding more and more people
to come and do that, actually, because I find a lot of people talking about books, but they were mostly reviews which are talking good things about books, but not necessarily being a critic about their thoughts and probably not launching that dialogue. Do you find it the same, or do you find it convincing, or you have different experiences?
So I mean, you asked me what's the one review, and I suppose I can think of one which exactly matches that. There was a critical review written by Gyam Pandi, who's a member of the Subaltern Studies community, who teaches at Princeton, and he wrote a critical review of my work in The Nation in America. But it was such a carefully written and fair and well argued piece that I engaged with them. Rather, I mean, you have to learn in this game to, if someone's just writing malevolent reviews, someone clearly doesn't like you for some reason, and they, or is jealous of you or envious or something, and they write a nasty review. And it's an idiotic review. You just have to learn to ignore that and just take that.
Yeah. That's exactly what I wanted to know from you. That a good review, which may or may not.
But Jan wrote an extraordinarily sophisticated review, and he linked it to the work of other people working in the same field, like Neil Ferguson and Linda Coley. And I wrote to him and engaged with him, and we became friends, and B, he invited me to teach at Princeton. So I ended up teaching at Princeton for a while because of this. So I was very glad I did, and in a sense, I did take on his criticisms, and I thought there were things which he said which were very fair, which I've incorporated into subsequent work.
Okay. And now, William, if I may try to understand, what is your writing process like? You just say that you take 4 to 6 years to do a research and for the book to come out. Your books come out within that, with that kind of a time gap in between. So how is the journey? If you could tell us with reference to your latest, The Anarchy, that how does a blank page fill up? I mean, how does it happen? Do you already have what you want to write in mind? Do you do those plotting of chapter plotting and such things? Or
yes, I'm very particular about this. Occasionally I read interviews with novelists who describe that they start with only a smell or a picture or emotion or something in their head, and they start writing, and in due course a novel appears. That's the opposite to my process. I spent 5 years reading through material to write these books, and in the course of that research begin to construct a plan which I stick to minutely. Occasionally it changes. Often in the writing, you realize things you hadn't spotted or make connections you hadn't made before, and so on. But in principle, I plan everything out absolutely minutely. I know what each chapter will be. I know which area it will cover. I know roughly the order of events that things will happen chapter to chapter. And the last year of my research is, in a sense, putting all into shape. And I have banks of card indexes with each character in the book, so that I have, their characters, in a sense, worked out before I start writing about them, and the best anecdotes about them to illustrate that, ready at hand. I have a date line, which often runs to 400 or 500 pages by the time that I get to write get starting writing with all the quotes already cut down and selected for each event. So that when I actually sit down to write at the end of whatever it is, 3 or 4 or 5 years research, the actual writing process is very intense but quite quick. I get up very early. I have beside a printout with all the material that I've written in that chapter up to then. And I spend the first couple of hours going through that very minutely, often outside on the terrace with a pen before I put my emails. There's then a bit of time when I sort of go for a run, have breakfast, look at the mails a bit. They don't answer many, to be honest, at that point of the day. But try and firefight the difficult ones, and then go back to the desk, put in the corrections by about 10, and hopefully by about 10:30, 11, I'm writing new material. And we'll keep up to about 4 when I collapse and have a very late lunch, and sort of if it's summer, maybe have a siesta. That's the process. It's very intense, but hopefully, even a very long book, if you've got everything worked out in advance, you can write it in 8-9 months.
So that is an interrupted writing time that you have.
And you've got to completely clear the decks.
And you manage to not take any kind of, given the time of social media, you just stay away from every kind of digital interruption as well?
I have a desk in a shed outside where there is no Wi-Fi, because I am on social media, and I'm always checking my mails and fiddling around with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And if you have Wi-Fi on your laptop, I find that you get about 10 lines written in the morning because you're missing around everything else. And the key is to clear the decks, and I lock my phone in my drawer. I take the laptop down to the shed, and I don't come back till 4 in an ideal world. And then you can spend the rest of the day, dealing with tax or emails or whatever it is that is looming. As there's always something. Change the light bulbs, buy toilet paper, whatever you have to do.
You definitely have few hours more than 24 by doing that.
But the key is to have all that to one side writing, and inevitably stuff will pop into your head. I have rung so and so, or thanks so and so for the party, or confirm such and such a thing that I'm going to do. But the key is to have a little sheet of A4 by your desk and just write it down on that. Don't do it. Don't get up and write to your friend, thank them for the dinner the night before, or shoot off to buy a new light bulb. Instead, you just got to put it aside and then do it when you've got time.
Yeah. So, William, I'll ask you something which is a very little different from your writer's profile. I want to know from you, what is the most inspiring experience that you may have had with a stranger, if at all? You have traveled to many countries, met many people. Did you ever have one such interaction which you would like to talk about?
To ask. The whole point of travel writing, which was what I was doing in my 20s, my early books like City of Gins and From the Holy Mountain, is entirely about chance meetings with strangers. So that can cause. So to select one would be silly. But the key people in my life who I met by chance, Dr. Jaffrey, the Persian teacher in City of Gins, who was my sort of early guru and guide to Delhi in the early days. Friend Bruce Wanell, who I met by chance in Islamabad in 1994, became my big Persian translator and French translator for all my subsequent books, and who kind of came to live with me for quite a lot of the year while we were doing that. And he's in a sense my closest collaborator. I suppose those are the two people that have had most influence on me, and both met by chance, met by plan.
I get it. So you have been a scholar, a traveler, a historian, a media presenter, and you have done many more hats, and you have won many awards. In spite of such success, did you ever feel that you would have loved to possess a particular skill or invest in a profession unrelated to your present profile? Did you ever feel envious of another profession?
To be honest, not terribly, no. I mean, there's all sorts of things in life I would like, qualities I would like to have. I would like to be sort of dazzlingly good looking and, and an incredible sportsman and sing opera, and the list is endless. But in actual reality, I think the greatest gift I was given was in a sense having one real talent that was clear. I have other friends who had that chance of being the opera singer or the athlete or the banker. Were able in a sense to choose from multiple lives. I never wanted that. I never had that. I always had the one big talent, which was writing. I didn't know that I could write books, but I knew, by the time I started writing books, that I could write articles and was good, letters and stuff. And so, it was worth taking the punt that I could enlarge that into the skill of writing a book. And I think, to have one clear talent is a great gift in itself. I often find that contemporaries who, in a sense, slightly underperformed from the dazzling possibilities that they seem to have at university, were often the people that had many, many talents and never particularly honed in on one and persisted with one.
True that. So my last question, William, if you would have to name one author or any other professional for that matter as your successor, who would you name? I mean, when I say successor, I don't necessarily mean just writing skills. I mean one person who seems very close to your ideals, your attitude, your talent, the person that you are.
Well, the person I'm probably most envious of his gifts as a writer is my friend Robert Macfarlane.
Okay.
Is a dazzlingly talented writer on travel and nature, and writes the most beautiful prose of anyone I know, really. He's an extraordinary talent. And I'd love to write like him. But I mean, he's a super well established author in his own right, and outsells me in many markets, particularly Britain. So it would be arrogant to see him as a successor in the sense that he's already in many ways more successful than me. So, but it's certainly the person most envious of.
No, I completely understand what you mean. Probably you see yourself in him, or you see him in you. Is that?
I did see myself. But I was giving an example of someone whose talents I'm envious of.
I get that. Yeah. Thank you so much, William, for your time. I really appreciate this conversation, and I had a great time talking to you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.